if we look at an individual level, the rest of us trying to, sort out conflicts at work and with our family and friends and whatnot, how can we increase our ability to reason wisely? Are there any general recommendations to foster better, wise reasoning?
Well, it's probably too early to tell that. The one strategy that we found to be effective under some circumstances, and I really should emphasize that it's fairly early on because we haven't tested its application in the real world, just in the context of strict laboratory or experimental conditions outside of the laboratory, but it has been expanded to all sorts of conflicts. Anyways, this caveat aside, the strategy that seemed to be working the best so far is if you have a conflict with somebody, try to take a step back and review it from sort of Lebron James perspective, where you start talking from a third person about yourself.
Nice.
So that does help a little bit. It's a small increment, but if you want to try this for a week. Just at the end of the day, write yourself a little diary in the third person and see what does it do to you after a few days. If you continue, and it doesn't have to be just about the bad stuff. It can be just, what's the most interesting thing that happened to me today? And interesting can be interesting bad, but could also be interesting good. And most of the time, our life is actually pretty good. Oh, just okay. And so write about that from a third person perspective. So, and that does have some positive effects. I mean, they are small and incremental, which means you often don't even see them. As often, we don't see how we change ourselves, but there are some shifts. For instance, we've done this over a course of a month, and when people do it over a course of a month, you compare their wise reasoning before to after, and there are quite substantial shifts. So that's one key strategy that we have identified to be fairly robust. Another strategy is, we already mentioned that, is to develop this type of teams of mentor-mentees that can foster some degree of interdependence in the relationship and promote, to some extent, less selfishness. Selfishness is the key factor for inhibiting factor for wise reasoning. And so if you can find ways to reduce the selfishness, and by that I do not mean just being egocentric in terms of your goals, but also just the cognitive perspective with which you approach the world. So quite often we can be very much interested in helping others, but our initial perspective is always, well, first person perspective. We start with me and then the rest of the world. And quite often that can be detrimental for your reasoning, because you never really get to seeing the other parts of the world. You just get stuck with me when you start generating arguments from that perspective. So switching that, maybe sometimes try to take the other perspectives into account first before you start considering your own, maybe another strategy. But these later ones are more speculative right now. Where we do have clearest evidence is this kind of writing in the third person about yourself.
That's terrific. It's great to have some suggestions there of evidence-based strategies. And as you mentioned, it's interesting to see how consistency, whether we talk training, nutrition, that doing this as a regular practice really starts to develop those skills. And Igor, if we sort of zoom back out to 30,000 feet here, and you mentioned at the start how wise reasoning is more helpful in these complex situations where problems, the solutions aren't so obvious. And, in medicine and training, if you're a physio, nutrition, even all these things, there's no one clear answer. There's lots of, different ways of doing it. And the outcomes are mixed between clients and people. Some people have tremendous results. Other people, we need to continue to problem solve. So could you talk a bit more again and round off this discussion around the value of the wise reasoning in these solving complex problems?
Well, one of the key values of wise reasoning is that it allows you to go beyond finding a single algorithmic solution to an issue. Quite often, we don't have those type of the type of situations we encounter in everyday life don't lead themselves to have a one clear-cut solution. Quite often, we just don't know all the parameters that may be involved, all the perspectives of other people, or in the medical or sort of performance context, all the features of an individual that may be relevant for making them perform better. And what wise reasoning does is it helps you to go beyond just thinking about one solution to a perspective where you try to integrate multiple considerations, be it, what is best for the individual, what is best for the group, or what is best for a husband, what is best for a wife, what is best for my own performance, and what is best for my group's performance. And in that sense, it goes beyond just something that where the algorithm would say just me, or group. Wise reasoning would try to find some kind of a balance in between those. And in the way it does it, it helps you to pay more attention to the situation at hand, something that we often are having sort of a blind spot for. We don't really see the situation as much as we should, because if you put too much attention to every single situation in our lives, we would not be able to function normally. But we are misers. We often just try to find the best heuristic solution. And what wise reasoning does, it's an antidote to that. It forces you to slow down and deliberately think through, maybe there are some features of the situation that are worth considering instead of just taking some rules of thumb. And that, in a way, can be beneficial for the larger group and for the person, but you may not even see it immediately.
Igor, that's tremendous. Fantastic insights here. And before we wrap up, I want to respect your time. What do you think the evolution of the research is in this area then in the next sort of 5 or 10 years?
Well, I think we're in a very exciting period where we just started looking at this type of questions of what is wisdom and how can we measure it. For thousands of years, we talked about the concept. In every serious society that you can think of that survived for more than 100 years had some ideas about what wisdom is. But only in the last 10, 15 years, we started to measure it for real in psychology, where we have now some instruments that can help us identify individual differences, help us to identify how can we improve it in everyday life, as we just talked about. And so I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be working on this trajectory, and who knows what will bring them. It will be very foolish of me to present you with one perspective on how this research will unfold. But I do think that we'll probably have a greater focus on identifying different situations under which wisdom may be adaptive, and maybe, hopefully, we can convince the more general population instead of just a small group of scientists, that focusing on this qualities instead of just on IQ, instead of just on some uniqueness features, can be beneficial for the society at large, and that we can all need and we can all use some wisdom in our lives.
Amen. 100% there. I think I could use a little more as well. And Igor, I definitely appreciate you taking the time today. Where can people keep up with all your tremendous research and keep up with what you're up to?
So you can definitely follow me on Twitter. I am Sci Wisdom. The toggle Sci Wisdom that's me. PSI and wisdom as one word. And otherwise, they can just look up my lab website at the University of Waterloo, Wisdom and Culture Lab. If you Google that, you will find more about our work and our publications. And finally, me and actually a colleague from London, UK, have a podcast which is called onwisdompodcast.com. On Wisdom Podcast as one word, where we also try to digest some of these complex matters for general audience.